And now I've got the pleasure of introducing Ligia. Ligia Cushman is a native Spanish speaker, certified in diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. She holds a master's in psychology, a bachelor's in psychology and master's degrees in human services and professional counseling. Ligia is a transformational leader, which we will see much more of in her new position over the coming years. She's got over two decades of child welfare experience, driven by her role as an adoptive mother, and now as the CEO of formerly NACAC, now Families Rising. She strongly believes in transformational leadership as the key to child welfare reform. We've been personally involved with NACAC for many, many years here at Adoption Network Cleveland. So we're really excited to see these changes. NACAC was founded in the 1970s and is now, as I mentioned, transforming into Families Rising. I'm going to be putting the website in the chat for anybody that would like to get more familiar. And with that, I will give you Ligia.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Yes, great. I'm very excited to be here. This is probably one of the first times that I get to do like a big talk about the transformation that's happening within our organization. Some of you saw me saying hello to Pat O'Brien. Pat was actually on our board just a few weeks ago. He just stepped off our board. He was one of the people who hired me. So I am very excited for Pat to be here because he has walked this last year with me, and it has been an incredible journey. As Betsy said, I am the daughter of immigrants. My first language is Spanish. I am an adoptive mother. Our son, we had the privilege of being in the delivery room when he was born, and I cut the umbilical cord, and he's been with us ever since. But before this call, I was telling Betsy a little bit about why I think the name needed to change. And so for those of you who don't know, NACAC, the full name of NACAC was the North American Council on Adoptable Children. And so when I stepped into the role last year in 2023 in January, there was a few things the board had asked of me as I started this new role. And one of them was, we really want you to think about, and that's all they said was think about, a new name for the organization. And so typically, I don't know how organizations are named, honestly. I think that in 1974, you had a group of adoptive parents who really didn't feel like there was a space where all adoptive parents could go to navigate the trauma, the challenges with parenting transracially, and so many other issues. And in that work, I think what happened was they got together, they created this really phenomenal hub. And Betsy and I were talking about this right before the call, that NACAC is where I went. For those of you who have been in it professionally, or if you're a foster or adoptive parent, NACAC is a conference everyone knows. It's the national conference that we used to have every year for foster parents, adoptive parents, and professionals, child welfare professionals. And it was in that conference where I learned how to be a really strong adoption professional, where I really learned that openness in adoption is not harmful. It actually is harmful if we don't have it. I learned that children, young adults, adult adoptees deserve and should be centered in our conversations about the work that we're doing and the future of the work that we're doing. And so because of that conference, I have always held NACAC at a high esteem. When I became the CEO, I still held it at a high esteem, but there were some things that really needed to change. One was to move us to the future. And I'll talk a little bit more about the future of our organization and how it's shifted in a very short period of time. But the name, that's what I really wanted to talk to you about today. So when you have a name that says the North American Council on Adoptable Children, that term adoptable is where a lot of adoptees reached out to me when I became the CEO and said, can you now please change this name? It causes us harm. I had never heard that before. We always just said NACAC anyway. We're in child welfare, we're acronym heavy, right? So when I started to hear that, and it wasn't just like, we always think of, the adoptee as this young person. I'm talking about people in their 40s who are seasoned professionals in the child welfare industry who have been asking for this name to be changed for, they said over the last 10 years. And so they were hopeful that I could come in and do something different. I don't think anybody expected us to do it as quickly as we did. One of the things that was really helpful was that the former CEO, or the former executive director, Mary Boo, had already done several exercises where they brought in like marketing professionals to help rebrand the organization. They did that a couple of times. So we already had lots of data. We had already interviewed the families that we were serving. We had already talked to the workforce, and that work had already been done. So we had a good basis on, okay, we've seen what people would like to see. We've heard from those that we're serving. They've given us their feedback. Now it's time for us to take action. And so in that action, one of the things that we did was we hired a marketing team, contracted a marketing team to really help us figure out, how do we do this? How do we do this well? You can't just say, hey, today our new name is this, right? We had to hire an attorney. But all of that, even in all of that work and trying to figure out how are we doing this well, I needed to bring back in adult adoptees. And what was really great is that at NACAC, formerly NACAC, Families Rising Now, we have a really strong team of professionals that were also in child welfare, lived experience. So for me, when I say lived expertise or lived experience, I'm referring to those who have lived in foster care, who have been foster children, youth, and who either aged out of the foster care system or were adopted out of the foster care system. And so those professionals that work at my organization really helped me come up with the new name. And so with the new name, once we had it, and Pat can chime in on this if he wants, but once we had we had narrowed it down to 3 names, and then we sent it out to the entire staff. And I asked them to vote on it. And I didn't give an option of, if you don't want to vote, that's fine. What I did was just vote, and then you have until this day to submit your vote, because I also knew when change is hard. And so I knew that for some people, a lot of people get married to names. And they feel like if I lose the name, then I'm losing something. And so I wanted to reassure my team, the board, that in switching to a new name, that doesn't cause harm, right? Because child welfare has evolved since 1974. And so I felt like our organization needed to evolve with it. One of the things that I felt was really important to do was to just give staff and the board the space to take some time and vote on names, which is what we did. And when the results came back, Families Rising is the name that won. And I say won because we had a few names to choose from. There were about 4, I think. And once we had the name, then we hit the ground running, because at that point now we need a new logo, we need a new website. And so you'll see, I know that Betsy dropped the link to our website. You'll see that it still says NACAC, because changing our website is a big deal. And so one of the things that it's a huge task too. And let me backtrack. In July, we went, we had our national conference, the conference I was telling you about, that taught me how to be an adoption professional, but it really taught me how to be an adoptive parent. And so I couldn't have thought of a better way to reveal our new name as a soft launch than at the conference. And it was our first in-person conference since the pandemic. And so I thought it was a great way to really showcase the new logo, answer questions. And then we gave folks a little Black notebook. I think it was Black. No, that's not what we did. We gave them these cards made by April Dinwiddie. Those of you who know April, she is phenomenal. She created these fantastic cards. They're like tabletop cards for transracially adopted families. And we had our logos put on them. And so everyone that went to the conference left with this ring of cards that they could use with their clients or they could use with their children. with our new name on it, which I thought was a really great way for people to start talking about it and sharing it with other people. And so we did that soft launch. And then I think I started getting like 30, 40 emails after the soft launch, even though I explained it, where people were like, your website still looks exactly the same. What's the new link? The website actually doesn't launch. The new website doesn't launch for 2 more weeks. And so, but it is beautiful. I have seen it. I love it. But I also want to make sure the board gets to see it and staff get to see it before we share it with everybody else. And so, in this process of changing the name, you know, I'm a firm believer that child welfare has done a lot of things well. And then I'm also the firm believer that child welfare really needs to evolve. Um, and for me, sometimes something that some may consider simple as rebranding an organization um, seems like, oh, but that's all you did. You just changed the name. But I changed the culture too. And so our work culture previous to my entering was really heavy on um, the needs of adoptive parents, which is important, the needs of foster parents, which is important. But I wanted to center some of this work back to where I believe in my 25-year career and as an adoptive parent, shift some of this work back to the kids. Somehow, sometimes I feel like we may have been sidetracked by, the needs that a parent has. Parents have really really big needs when they're adopting children. And at the same time, one of the things that I've learned in this career is that there's a lot of supports out there for parents, adoptive parents. There's a lot of support out there for foster parents. And I wanted to see the same energy for oh, Melinda's coming. And I wanted to see the same energy for the young people that we're serving. Hi, Melinda. And not just the young people. So my COO, the VP, if you will, of the organization is an adopted person out of the foster care system. To think of the incredible work that he gets to lead at our organization and the shift that he gets to make with the workforce, with parents, with young people, is huge. And so I think that the workforce, child welfare, if I'm being frank, we've done harm too, right? I've been in this work, I've been complicit as well. And if I'm going to run an organization that I want to be different, that I want it to be the staple, the go-to for supportive services, for post-care services, um, then the work culture internally needed to change as well as the name. And so a big part of this exercise has really been, okay, so I'm changing the name, but what do I want this space to feel like? I want it to feel inviting to adoptees, to youth who aged out of the foster care system. I have employees now that aged out of the foster care system. So when we all get together and we're talking about, we've got to make sure, that this young person who was adopted gets what they need, but we're not talking about the homeless foster youth that against all odds had to figure out how to survive in this very difficult world. That's what I want to change in child welfare. And so when I'm, just changing the name to Families Rising, big deal. Changing the logo, big deal. But I want to take the legacy, the things that we'll always remember about the NACAC of yesterday, right? And bring that forward with us into the future. And some of those things are simple things that I consider to be simple, like our membership and ensuring that our magazine, I guess it's a magazine, that we give to members, Adopt Talk. I am the one who rebranded the whole thing, and I'm the one that adds all the articles and all those pieces. So if it looks different, it's intentional. We want it to look different. We want it to feel different. And we also want it to have more voices of those who have experienced child welfare. And so for me, as I sit here as the new CEO, I still feel very new. I've been here for a year, but I still feel very new. And I also feel like I've been here a really long time. Um, but for me, I think it's this name change. It was incredibly brave. I didn't know how brave it was going to be, or how brave we would have to be. But I will tell you, there were some people that did not like the name and actually reached out to me and said, so you're not serving adoptive parents anymore, because adoption is no longer in our name, right? And so we had to do a lot of explaining about, we have evolved as an organization. So yes, we started out with that group of parents in 1974 who really wanted a space for adoptive parents to get the services, the support that they needed. And at the same time, I hadn't known that NACAC was doing all these other great, phenomenal things that no one was talking about. Like we created a coaching model for engaging youth in child welfare. And actively right now, we have staff members that are traveling across the country, Hawaii, New Mexico, working with tribal nations, helping them build up how they're engaging young people in the child welfare system. Nobody was talking about that. The other piece was also our work in Minnesota. We've had a program for 20 years where we support post-adoption families, right? Post-support families, right? At the same time, I knew a little bit about that, but what I didn't know was that we were also serving foster families and kinship placement families. And so again, sometimes what happens in organizations is we get so used to, hey, this is our job, this is what we're doing day in and day out. But there was some really incredible, huge things happening at NACAC that no one knew about, that now we're able to share. And now we're showcasing and talking more about really hard things. So racial equity, it's a big deal, right? We know that Black and brown children are disproportionately represented in child welfare. What are we doing about it? And I think as an organization, we've talked a lot about it, but now we're working hard to do something about it. And so with that comes a really exciting initiative that we are very proud of. That's just, that's just in its infancy stages as we're rolling it out. But we are now the lead. We received a grant from the federal government where we are now leading the National Center for Workforce Equity and Leadership, known as CWEL. And in that work, we get to, and I say we get to because it's not been done before, but we get to find ways to bring justice to child welfare. And how do we do social justice and child welfare? Shouldn't we already have that all figured out? If we look at data, if we talk to people who have experienced child welfare, they'll tell you there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so I'm excited that Families Rising can take the legacy of NACAC and bring it to this space of here's how we think the work should look differently. And so we're going to get to work with tribal nations, with Puerto Rico, with states all across the country and help them build the child welfare system that's more equitable. And also that is developing professionals and leaders of color across the country to meet the needs of kids and families. And so I know I've been talking for a while. I don't know if anyone has any questions or any comments, or I can keep talking.
We don't have any questions in chat yet. So why don't you gather your questions, everybody, and put them in chat. And Ligia, in the meantime, you can share a little bit more while people are thinking and getting together.
As an adoptive parent, I think for me, when I stepped into this role, I remember telling my son the name of the organization. He always wants to know what name, what company I'm working for. And he just, for the first time ever, he just kind of stared at me and he goes, "Why does that name bother me?" And I said, "Bothers you because it probably should, right?" Because as a social worker, I've taught him there's no such thing as a child that's not adoptable. So when you have an organization named the North American Council on Adoptable Children, it implies that some kids are adoptable and some are not. And it wasn't done intentionally at all. I think that was, I mean, none of us who have done this work for 20 plus years thought that the name was wrong for many, many, many years. But I think for me, that was really the icing on the cake when my own kid was saying to me, Mom, what are you gonna do about that name? And he knows me as a change agent. I didn't realize I was a change agent for a long time. I had I got really lucky um, when I moved to Florida from North Carolina. So I worked in North Carolina. That's where I grew up professionally in child welfare. Most of my career in child welfare was in North Carolina. And then when I moved here to Florida, I had a CEO who wanted me to do this program through AdoptUSKids. And in that program, it was for emerging leaders of color in child welfare. And they were gonna, provide us with some leadership training. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I applied, I got in. There's only 16 of us that could get in at a time. And it's known as the Minority Development Leadership Program. And that's through AdoptUSKids and Spalding for Children. And in that space, I got mentored, I got trained, I had to take tests, I had to do a presentation for some congressmen and some federal agents. And it was a wonderful experience. In that space is where I learned that I was a transformational leader. And if you haven't read up on transformational leadership, it's this idea that you can come into an organization, you can see, the strengths that staff have, you can put people in the right spaces, and then produce change that is necessary. And so for a lot of people on the outside looking in, they're like, oh my gosh, they're rebranding, everything feels really new. But for my staff internally, it has felt really, really new. I think for them in particular, it was exciting, and it was also a little scary. How are people, I remember somebody asking me, how are people going to find us? We're NACAC. How are they going to find us? And, had our marketing team come in and explain like, oh, we're just going to reroute it. So it's fine, right? Or we're going to, how are they going to know that the name changed? Well, we're doing a huge marketing campaign. So it started with a video that I launched and shared at the conference. And then subsequently, we've been sharing it with multiple people, and we'll share it again on our social media, and it'll be on our landing page on our new website. But I think for me, what was really exciting was to see staff embracing it, asking for t-shirts. I still haven't gotten them t-shirts. At some point I will, but they want t-shirts. They want to be able to share the vision and the mission. They feel really a part of this process because I made them a part of the process. I knew that if we were going to change the name of an organization that had the same name since the year that I was born, we were really going to have to get some buy-in. And if staff weren't bought in, then they weren't going to be able to get their clients and their colleagues bought into the change as well. The transition, I will say, to the new name has been exciting. There have been some bumps. I think with any change is hard, but change is also rewarding. And I feel like we're on the other side of that at this time. We have people that are really excited about coming here to work, reading our newsletters. We have people that are very disappointed that the conference will not be in person this year. So there's a shift that's happening as well with the folks that we serve and the folks that partner with us in this work. So I'm excited for the future, for sure.
Thank you. So I have some questions, even though we don't have any yet in chat. So one question I have, going back to the actual name change in the process, did you have focus groups, or how did you come up with the 4 names that were floated to staff? Can you back up a little bit and tell us more about the process?
For sure. So focus groups had already been done prior to me. And so, but I still had all that data. So that's where they brought in adoptees, they brought in former foster youth, adoptive parents, foster parents. I don't know that kinship relative placements were brought in, but they were all able to give us their opinions. What happened though with the focus group was that we didn't come with names for people to vet. We asked for names. And of course, when you do that, you had 40 different names. And so that caused a little gap in moving forward because it was too much. It was too many names. It was a huge process. I also partnered and brought in April Dinwiddie. If you don't know her, she's an icon, adoptee who has done some really transformational work in transracial adoption across our country. And I'm a super, super fan, and I've known her for a long time. And so when April also has a degree in marketing. And so I brought her in to help us, like, how do we do this? How do we brand this? How do we do this in a way that feels inviting and supportive? And I remember having a conversation with April, and she was like, she said to me, why do you have to keep North American? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I think we should. Like, it defines us, right? We're working in Canada and all across the United States. And she was like, yeah, but that's like it feels outdated. And so I remember going back to the marketing team and they were like, yeah, your name's kind of huge. It's really an outdated way to name. And, some organizations like the Adoption Network, they had, no, it was Families, I'm going to say my name, Families Rising. It's Raising the Future. They changed their name to Raising the Future. And I remember I was working there at the time. I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this is such an innovative way to change how people see adoption and foster care and all those pieces. So I got to be an employee at an organization that had done the focus groups, had done this really big overhaul of our programs and not just our programs, but how we showed up virtually for the world. And I wanted to do the same thing. So I was really excited when the focus groups had happened. But I do think that when we did those, we gave too many options. And I think that people were overwhelmed by that. So when we landed on the 4 names, we left some that said North American, whatever the new name was going to be. We had, thank you, Denise. We had Families Rising, which I loved from the beginning. I've got to say, but then I had to trust my staff. So we had 3 names, I think, maybe 4. And I had to trust that they were going to choose what they felt like was the best name. And I'll tell you, it was close. It was close. When the votes came in from the board and from staff, half wanted this North American other name, and then the other half wanted Families Rising, but it was beat out by 1 name. So by 1 vote. So I can tell you that it was not easy. Like then I had to come back and tell people, hi, I'm so sorry, your name wasn't chosen, but this name was chosen. And I think when you're a CEO and you're rebranding or renaming a thing, it's really important for there to be room for people to like grieve a little bit, step away from, this is going to feel different. And it's also important to move forward. And so the hardest part was then like, okay, we did the thing, we have named it, now we have to tell the world. And I think that was the scariest part for me, because I was like, oh God, are they going to love it? Are they going to hate it? This is NACAC. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that I would be the person, or I would lead the team that would rebrand the organization. It's humbling. It's almost full circle. And it's exciting. And so it has been a wild journey this last year of really ensuring that those focus groups also heard back from us and said, hey, this is our new name. What do you think? Some loved it, some didn't, and that's okay. I think that with anything that's new, it takes a while to get used to. And so we've experienced that as well, where people are like, we love the name, it's fabulous. Or people are like, this name doesn't make any sense. So, and having a response for both, right, is important. So Focus groups were huge, and anybody who knows me knows that I like to vet things before I just do. And so this was one of those things. This was one of those things that had to be vetted 100% by the board and by my staff as well.
Thank you. Another question I had, and you don't have to answer this if it's difficult. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but so this obviously comes with a lot of opportunities and all this growth and change, but it probably also comes with some challenges or some learning curves. I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, like, as you look at the organization, how do you plot out that course and what are some of the areas that need the most work?
Oof, that's a good question. Um, so let me say this, the first few months when I stepped into this role, I did a lot of just assessing, observing. I flew out to Minnesota where a lot of my staff were. I wanted to learn about their work, their passion, and I just took notes. And I think that's with any new job that's big like this, or any job at all, that's really what you should do, is take in what's going on and then figure out the spaces where things need to change. So there were things that were done brilliantly that have not changed and will not change. But then there were things like um I had a vision about the organization doing I about us communicating more about what the organization was doing internally. And I knew that ultimately we were doing so much. I was overwhelmed. I had been following NACAC for the last 20 years, and I didn't know about half of these things until I was applying for the job. And I was like, they do what? We lead the center on what? Like, didn't know any of that. And so I definitely wanted to start showcasing what we were doing. At the same time, you're talking about an organization that still saw themselves as a grassroots organization. And I mean staff in particular, not so much the board. I think the board was ready for something big and different. I think there were some staff that really were like, well, we don't want to lose what we've had here because this is beautiful what we've built here, right? And so I wanted to honor that. And at the same time, I knew that there was so much more work that we could be doing. There were more grants that we could be getting to assist us in showing everyone what we've been doing and the good work that we've been doing. So for me, it was important to continuously communicate, always communicate. And again, at some point, we've got to move forward. And so I think, I let my staff sit with the name for 30 days. And then we went to the conference and I launched it there. And then I let the community that we were serving, the people that had been a part of NACAC, get used to it for like 3 months while we were building the new website. That's another reason why we didn't change everything all at once, is because change is hard for people. And so I wanted it to be in phases. And it was what our marketing team recommended anyway. Do it in phases, especially a name that's been around since 1974. You need to give space for that to be where people can share how they're feeling about a thing. So I would say one of the challenges was not everybody was bought in, not just to the new name, but we're going to center our work on adoptees, not the person who adopted. And so, challenging, not necessarily challenging, but changing how we were talking about things, how we were feeling about things, right? And addressing, okay, so this doesn't feel good to you. Let's talk about why. And I think for me that was important for my staff to have that space with me. And then it was also important for me to have the board saying, okay, now we got to move on. And so it was a balance. And there were a couple of people on the board that felt like, I don't know about this name, right? But the board, I will say this, if you are leading any organization and your board is as supportive as mine is, then you're very lucky. I'm learning every day that is not what everyone else gets. And so I'm very excited that they gave me the space to make the changes that needed to be made. But that was one of them. I will say, if you've done another thing is, if you've done adoption work, child welfare work for a long time, we get used to the same doing business as usual. And so there were some things that I felt like as an organization, we really needed to streamline. And so we took care of some of those pieces as well. But it was all in the benefit of staff and in the benefit of the organization of that I was dreaming of for the future. And so setting up, real strong guidelines for certain things and talking through why do we do this way, realizing, oh, it's just the way we've always done it. That was helpful for me to be like, yeah, we're going to switch it this way because it's a streamlined process and it's going to be helpful in the end. And I'll tell you, a lot of the changes, of course, are met with resistance. And then once they do it once or twice, they're like, oh my gosh, I love this. So, which is what happened with a lot of the things that we implemented. So it takes time, but I think when you change is uncomfortable. And that's one of the things that my staff kept saying, some of them, the ones that have been here for a long time are like, I'm feeling uncomfortable. You should, it's change, right? And then just making space to hear them out on the things that were really impacting them and helping them understand the vision.
Thank you. We had one question that was submitted to be asked anonymously, so I'll ask it. It's about family preservation. So what is NACAC or Families Rising doing to promote family preservation first and foremost, because we know that it's always in a child's best interest to remain with their biological family whenever it's safe and possible. What's NACAC or Families Rising doing to keep biological families together as a first priority?
So thank you for whoever sent that question. I will tell you that I saw adoption. So I was an adoption social worker for a long time, and 8 years. And then I moved to post-adoption support, and I moved to post-reunification support. So I provided one-on-one family visits to those who had been reunified. And I did that for about 4 or 5 years in North Carolina. And I will tell you that it was during that time that I realized that the child welfare system, remember I said earlier, we cause harm in child welfare. And there are some parts of child welfare that still won't own that necessarily, right? They won't say we've caused harm to this family. I would love to see a lot of funding shifted to the front, what we call the proverbial front door, meaning if we pour funds into kids who are in foster care, into their fostering parents, into their, relative caregivers, why are we not doing the same for families to stay together? I am a huge advocate of families staying together whenever possible. I am a huge advocate that if we know that what I call first families, birth parents, don't have access to the things that they need to keep their children, then we are failing as a system. And so NACAC itself is not, there's not work that we're doing at that front door. Our funding sources come for different services, right? So we're engaging youth in child welfare, we're providing post-permanency support and foster care support. What that means is we're not an adoption agency and we do not license foster homes, but we provide support groups for them in Minnesota only. And so I will tell you that our funding sources come from that side. But one of the things that we're working on as an organization is we want to do podcasts. We want to update our blogging, and I'm all about the blogs and the podcast right now. And so we have some plans to start having those hard conversations about what is our nation as a whole doing to ensure that families stay intact, right? We have a huge, and I think if the pandemic didn't teach us anything, it taught us, those of us in the child welfare workforce, it taught us that we have way more children in care than should be. And it also taught us that reunifications slow down significantly, right? And some of them were removed because of, I'm not even going to get into the reasons why people get their children removed, but I want to say this. Our position is that children should remain in in their family of origin whenever possible. If that is not an option, then a relative placement. If that is not an option, I believe adoption by a stranger should be the last and final option once we have exhausted everything. And if we haven't exhausted the birth family connection, the bio parents first, then we've failed. So our funding doesn't come from that line item. So our work is more in the post-care end, but we have positions. So you have our link to our website. We do have positions on reunification. We have positions on racial equity. We have like written out positions that will be transferred to our new site, because those things are important and they matter. And so, yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. It sounds like there's lots of opportunities too to partner with organizations that are maybe more directly connected in that work, and you can support their work as well. We had one other question that actually backs onto that, I think. How does Families Rising work with state and county agencies?
So, oh, wow, this is a great question. Right now, we have a contract with the state of Minnesota where we provide, like I mentioned, those post-care support groups across the entire state. But we also provide trainings to counties, to states, to tribal nations, to territories like Puerto Rico, for example. We will provide trainings on starting support groups for families, or let's talk about racial equity in transracial adoption. What does adoption justice look like? So we have a huge long list of trainings that we go and we do across counties, states, tribal nations. We have one of the top nations, top FASD, fetal alcohol syndrome experts who goes across the country, all across North America, actually. She just got back from Canada, Barb Clark, who does phenomenal work in that area as well. And she's our director of training. So she is responsible for all of the national trainings that we provide to counties and states. And we work within your budget. So, and we also go to conferences. We're constantly going to conferences and speaking. And we do a lot of webinars that are free to everyone. So those are some of the things that are really exciting about the rebrand for me, because now we get to be more intentional about what are we talking about? Are we talking about the rights of children, LGBTQ plus? Are we talking about their rights in child welfare? Are we talking about what they need from us? Are we supporting them in the way that they need to be supported? And the same goes for Latinos, the same goes for all children in foster care who have experienced trauma, abuse, neglect, and who deserve to be with people that love them. And I think that in most cases, that's their first family. And when that is not possible, then it's their adoptive family.
Thank you. I had a couple other questions. So let's see. Before everybody signed in, we were talking a little bit about geography. So you don't live in Minnesota. You live in Florida, as you mentioned. So how has NACAC expanded, both physically and philosophically, geographically?
Yeah.
And what impact has that had?
So I am the first CEO of the organization not to live in Minnesota. I think the board, again, I told you the board was being really brave when they were hiring. And so they were really brave when they hired me, because I had never even been to Minnesota before. So I remember preparing for the interview, and I was researching, like, what's the data like out there? What are, disproportionality and disparity rates in child welfare? What does that look like? What are parents saying they need in Minnesota? And so I will tell you that the majority, when I started a little over a year ago, when I started, we had, oh my gosh, I'm trying to think right now. we had about 20 staff in Minnesota, and then about 6, 7 that were remote workers. But of course, when the pandemic came, everybody went remote and we never went back to the office. So everyone, even the folks in Minnesota, remained remote till this day. And then one of the things that happened was we got opportunities to, we got more fundings from certain grants, but then we also got the opportunity to apply for a federal grant where, again, remember I told you when I first started, I discovered that we were doing all these trainings across North America for child welfare professionals, but no one really knew that we were doing that in the workforce. And so, you know, of course, we did a whole huge campaign pushing that through and letting people know. But at the same time, there was a space for us to apply for a federal grant where we could provide similar trainings to the workforce and create a workforce that focused on equity. And I mentioned it earlier, it's called CWEL, the Center for Workforce Equity and Leadership. And in that space, we got the grant, which is very exciting, in September. And now we have, I feel like we've almost tripled. I thought it was doubled in size, but I feel like we've almost tripled in size employee-wise. And so now where I started, when I came in and I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to support a team virtually? And they're all primarily in Minnesota. How am I going to do this? And it's almost flipped on its head now because now I have people that work in California, in Colorado, in Texas, like everyone's everywhere now. So I have a larger team, and we are fully remote. And I've had to learn a lot about what does it look like to manage a team virtually versus in person. And what I've learned is that it's a blend of both. One is I need to go and visit quarterly. So that's one of the things that I do with my Minnesota team. But then also, how am I available to onboarding people and coaching them and doing that work? And Zoom is a great gift. But I also created like onboarding tools, and it's just been helpful for you know, I'm seeing them every single day, literally. I see everyone every single day. And so, and then I bring them in also for like once a year, we'll get together for, I'm doing it now with the new CWEL folks. We're getting together next week here in Orlando to do our kickoff meeting and start working on our strategic planning and things like that. So the world has evolved in how, you know, CEOs can manage multiple spaces at once. And so I'm thankful to be the CEO in this space at this time, because there are things that have been very helpful. And I feel like my team, I know them well. That was one of the questions the board asked me: how are you going to engage a team virtually? And I definitely explained visiting quarterly, but then also taking time to get to know them. So when I first started, I did interviews with each and every single staff member. Got 30 minutes with me, and I just took some time for them to get to know me to get to know them. And I feel like that was helpful. And even now when new people are onboarded to the organization, that I still remind their supervisors, hey, make sure they take their 30 minutes to schedule with me so that they can have a one-on-one with me. And I think that's different than what's been done in the past. But I know that it helps start to build like we are in this together. And I like to get to know who's working for us. So it takes extra effort. You have to be intentional about building those relationships. But I feel like I've been able to do a good job with that as well.
Thank you. I actually have two more questions and then we'll be out of time, I think. So if anybody has a last question, please put it in chat. But did the mission and vision statements of Families Rising change along with the name?
Good questions. Wow. There's some language that will change in the mission. Again, when we talk about the changes that we're wanting to do across the organization, when you're talking about changing a name, it's easy to say, no, our vision and mission is the same, right? But our work has evolved significantly. So we want to ensure that that vision speaks to the mission, speaks to the work. And so I'm not sharing what the vision is yet because the board has not approved that yet. But I will say that words like permanency, permanent, we're going to start, and you may be seeing that as well. We're going to start removing words like that from the way that we talk about what kids need. We know they need permanency, obviously, but really what they need is loving, supportive people, family, right? A lot of adoptees have told me, for example, I had a permanent home before foster care, right? And so we're making an assumption that they didn't have permanency before foster care. And so I am definitely looking at doing things differently in that space as well.
Thank you. Yeah, when people talk about permanency and children being discharged from foster care, I think when they use the term permanency, they're talking about with somebody other than going back home to their family.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad to hear that. So my last question was, and I don't know if this lands anywhere or not, but as we've looked at the scope of our mission evolving over the years and changing in recent years, that's also involved including the donor conceived community. And so as you look at, broadening your communities that you're serving, I don't know if that assisted reproduction or donor conceived people are on your agenda or your radar at all.
That's a great question. Wow. How do I answer that? I feel it has not been on my radar, so I'll be fully transparent in saying that. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't. And again, when we're talking about families rising, right, that's why the name was so important to me, because I feel like there's room for us to touch other spaces that maybe we weren't able to reach with a name like the North American Council on Adoptable Children. And so I definitely, I'd love to learn more, but see if you are open to letting me learn a little bit more about that space and how do we support that? Because we at NACAC, we've not ever, that I know of, done that kind of work or supported in that space before. So I would love to learn more about that, but I'm not opposed to it.
Thanks. I didn't intentionally ask the question as a segue, but next Monday, we have someone on the Monday evening speaker series talking about that topic. So
Oh, that's perfect. Yes.
you're welcome to join us next Monday or watch the
Oh, that would be
recording.
great. That would be
Tyler
great.
Smith from Atlanta, Georgia. He's a donor conceived person originally from
Oh,
Ohio.
wow.
So
Okay.
he's
Yeah, I would love
very
that.
active in advocacy on those issues.
That's awesome. I would love to.
Good. Well, thanks. I did put a quick, just a couple question survey in the chat. If people could let us know your thoughts about this evening and also any ideas you have for future topics, you can click through to that. Those are always helpful for us, and we do look at your answers. Thank you so much for being here this evening. And Ligia, thank you for taking time out of what I'm sure is an incredibly busy schedule to share. And it was really nice to get to know you a little bit and to hear more about the transition. I know over the years I got different surveys and it was part of, I think, voting on different names and things like that as a NACAC Now Families Rising member. So it's exciting to hear more about the details of how that came about. And congratulations on everything that you have achieved
Thank you.
with us.
Thank you.
For everybody who's joining us this evening, I think as many of you know, Adoption Network Cleveland is a nonprofit organization. We are membership based, and we ask that you consider joining to help support the work. You can see more at our website, which is adoptionnetwork.org. And please check out what we have next week and in coming weeks. And have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.